Welcome to a very special episode of the Tolkien Experience Podcast. I'm Dr. Luke Shelton, and instead of our usual interview format, this week's episode is going to be just a conversation between me and my co-host, Dr. Sara Brown. We decided that we did need to take a little bit of a break between our seasons, and we thought a great way to end this first season would be to give you kind of a season finale. So what we're going to do is talk about some of our favorite interviews from this season, share some stories from our own personal Tolkien experiences, and finally take a minute to thank you for spending your time with us. We want to thank you so much for joining us on this journey, and be reassured that we will be back next year with a whole new slate of interviews for you to look forward to. So again, thank you so much for being with us, and we hope you enjoy today's episode. So we've had a lot of really interesting guests this season, and I wanted to ask you, what have been some of your favorite interviews?
That's a massive question because there have been so many really good interviews, and I have to be honest, I've enjoyed every single one of them, all for different reasons. I mean, the kinds of people I've been interviewing who very kindly gave up their time for us range from academics through to artists. And all of them have had something wonderful and interesting and particular to say about Tolkien. So choosing my favourites, let me see. So I've got two favourites, and they're both for very different reasons. And the first one is Una McCormack. And I really enjoyed that interview because I got to geek out a little bit. But I got to geek out with somebody whose work I have admired for a very long time. I've seen her give a number of interviews and a number of lectures. And she talks a lot about fan fiction in her lectures, which I really like because not every academic touches on fan fiction. And I really enjoy that. But she's really knowledgeable. She's really interesting. And of course, there's all her other career as a writer of many things Star Trek. So it was absolutely wonderful to sit and chat with her. And I loved that interview. I really enjoyed talking to her about all of those things. So that was great. The other one was for a very different reason, and that was with Andy Higgins. And that's because Andy is a really good friend of mine. I count him as a really great friend. We've known each other for quite a long time, since before we both passed our PhDs. And in fact, we spent a lot of our time kind of geeing each other up on that journey to the PhD, which, as you know, is long and arduous. So that was lovely. But just getting to sit and chat with somebody I really like being with, because he's a lovely guy. He's absolutely wonderful. But he's also incredibly knowledgeable. You know, his particular niche in Tolkien's studies, he knows so much about it and he's really interesting, but he's just a lovely, lovely person. So there you go. I kind of cheated. I had two. So I'm going to throw it back at you, Luke. What about you? What's your favourite from the ones that you have done?
Well, if you're going to cheat, I'm going to cheat too, and I'm going to do two. The first one is kind of for the same reason that you liked your interview with Andy. I really enjoyed my interview with Amy Sturgis because I've known her for so long. She's actually played a really important part in my appreciation of Tolkien. I audited a college level course from her when I was 15 years old. Oh. And so really, that was part of my first exposure to kind of scholarship and criticism, and particularly scholarship and criticism about Tolkien. And so it was really nice to get to catch up with her, but also to see what she's doing now, because I've always loved that her particular emphasis is in intellectual history, kind of looking at the development and evolution of ideas. And I've always thought that was a fascinating perspective that she brought to scholarship. Yeah.
Amy's a wonderful, wonderful scholar. I absolutely love her.
Yeah. And the other interview that I really enjoyed was with Maria Alberto. And I enjoyed this one because her focus is similar to mine in that it deals a lot with like reception and the way that people respond to a text or incorporate it into their lives. But her focus is on fan fiction studies, and that's something I've never really looked into in any great detail. And so it was nice to kind of get a lot more information about a field that I'm interested in, but not a part of the field that I particularly focus on. And this is one that I had been looking forward to having because we were able to interview her research partner, Don Moss-Thuma, earlier in the season. So we knew that the Tolkien fan fiction survey was going to be coming out. So when they finally released that, we were able to have Maria Alberto on, and it was a really fabulous interview.
Oh, excellent. So those are the favorites from what you did in your interviews. Do you have a favorite of the interviews that I did?
Oh, I see. Going to call me out a little bit.
Yeah, throw you a curveball there.
So I really liked your interview of Una McCormack, and I think a lot of that was just because I felt like there was a lot of chemistry in that interview, and you guys really fed off of each other's energy really well. But to spare the audience just an entire interview talking about Una McCormack again, I'll pick Sean Gunner. I really liked that interview. I liked that one because there were a lot of things that Sean said in that interview that I felt like were important to say as the chair of the Tolkien Society, but also that people unfamiliar with the management or governance of the Tolkien Society or the way that it is approaching Tolkien's work now wouldn't really expect. They wouldn't expect for the Tolkien Society to be concerned about diversity and inclusion and being a bit more progressive in those areas just because of the stereotype of the Tolkien fan as the old white stodgy guy, you know. And so I really, really liked that interview because I thought it touched on a lot of important things about how we can incorporate Tolkien's work into the world as it is now and what it's still saying to us as readers. Yeah, I think that's a great choice because that was a good interview, and Sean had a lot of stuff to say that I thought was really, really important. And it was good to have that conversation out there at the time. And of course, not just for then, but something that we must, as a Tolkien society, but also as a Tolkien fandom and a Tolkien scholarship, we must continue to work on. Agreed. So that's a little bit of our favorite interviews, and that's something that we're kind of reflecting on that the listeners were able to share with us. But I thought it'd be nice to take a little bit of time to share something new with our fans, and that's part of our own Tolkien experiences. So we've been able to kind of squeeze in part of our experiences as we've been doing interviews, but I thought it'd be nice to really try to answer some of these questions head on so our readers, our listeners can have a little bit more information about us.
Yeah, sure.
So why don't we start by asking you the first of our normal questions. How were you introduced to Tolkien's work?
Oh, wow. Well, I was very young, actually. When I was a little kid, I was the kind of kid that just read everything I could get my hands on. I preferred reading to absolutely any other kind of activity. Total book nerd. And my father had a wonderful bookshelf, just so many books. And he was very careful about what he would allow me to read, obviously. But one day when I was 8 years old, he handed me The Lord of the Rings. And he had this, this big paperback version, the one with the yellow cover, with the yellow arch on it. I think it's a paperback from the 1970s. That's the copy that he had. And he said, here, have a go at this. And I did. And it actually took me a little while to read, which was kind of surprising to my parents because I used to devour books the way most kids devour chocolate and crisps. But I did take my time over it, and I really immersed myself in this world, in this book, and I thought it was absolutely incredible. So I read The Lord of the Rings before I read The Hobbit. For the simple reason that my dad didn't have a copy of The Hobbit. He only had a copy of The Lord of the Rings. So having finished The Lord of the Rings, I then went to my second home, otherwise known as the local library, and asked there and was handed a copy of The Hobbit, which I took away and was immediately slightly confused by, because for reasons I don't remember, I think I assumed that The Hobbit was going to be about Frodo, but prior to the events of The Lord of the Rings. I don't know why that I know. So I was slightly confused, but then I understood, it's Bilbo's story, and I read it and I enjoyed it. So yeah, I was about 8. It was maybe a year later when I first attacked the Silmarillion. Well, as you can imagine, a 9-10-year-old reading the Silmarillion, I didn't really understand it very well. And in fact, I had to return to it a number of times before I finally grasped exactly what was going on in the Silmarillion. But there you are. I was really young. I was about 8, and it was all down to my dad. And in fact, at his funeral, I read Galadriel's Nemarië, kind of in recognition of the fact that he was the one who set me off on my Tolkien journey all those years ago. And that copy of the book that he gave to me is now on my bookcase in what I think is a rather nice circle, actually. Yeah. So what about you, Luke? How were you introduced to Tolkien's work?
Well, like you, it was when I was very young. I don't actually remember the first time that I read The Hobbit. My first Tolkien memory is of, I guess I would have been in 4th grade in elementary school, and we had a storyteller who would come and recite chapters of The Hobbit in installments, like a couple chapters at a time. And I must have read The Hobbit before that, because I remember sitting there and waiting for him to make a mistake so I could correct him. Because I was then, and I still am, very full of myself. So I still am really, really grateful in a way that my first Tolkien experience is actually of a storyteller, because I feel like that's something that's kind of unique to me, and I get to hold on to. And, so many of our guests have said, you don't really feel Tolkien until you read him out loud. I kind of feel like my experiences back that up a lot.
That's wonderful.
And then it was a couple years before I read The Lord of the Rings. I read it in middle school. I think I was around 11. Mm-hmm. And that was a couple years before the movies came out.
Oh, I forget how young you are.
So I had a little bit of time where I could just kind of come up with my own ideas about the story, which was really nice. And for some reason, I was completely oblivious to the fact that there were like movies in production while I was reading. Then, as far as the Silmarillion, I went straight from The Lord of the Rings into the Silmarillion. Mm-hmm. And I made it through the whole Silmarillion and started reading Unfinished Tales before I stopped partway through Unfinished Tales. And I think the reason for that was because I didn't really get the Silmarillion. Like, I read the stories. I know the vocabulary was a little difficult, but I don't think I really connected all the stories together in a meaningful way. Mm-hmm. And I think I was hoping that Unfinished Tales would like give me the unfinished tales of the Silmarillion in a way that would like piece them all together, kind of into a manageable narrative. Mm-hmm. And when it became clear to me that that wasn't happening, I was like, well, I just don't understand any of this. And so I just kind of walked away for a few years. So it wasn't until later that I came back and was able to actually wrap my mind around what the Silmarillion was trying to do.
Yeah, fair enough.
So I'm glad that we got the chance to share our early experiences of Tolkien. But I know that our listeners are probably curious about what our favorite parts of Tolkien are. So what is your favorite part of Tolkien right now?
The question that I was dreading. See, this is why I can understand now why a lot of my interviewees have done the same kind of when I ask them this question. It's a bit like asking which is your favorite child or something like that. Oh, okay. If I really had to pick a moment, And I'm picking this moment simply because every time I read it, it brings me to tears. And it's the death of Theoden. Every single time. And I have read that and listened to it in the audiobook so many times. I have lost count. I mean, there's no way I can count the number of times I have read or listened to that scene. And every time I'm choked up. And it's just crazy. So I suppose I would pick that one because of the fact that I have this visceral emotional reaction to it every single time. Yeah, okay, I'm going to go with that one. And that's only because I'm not allowed to have like 5 different favourites. So I'm going to pick that one. What about you, Luke? What's your favourite?
So I'm going to use a bias measuring stick as my only way of coming up with a favorite. And that is, my measuring stick is which one has led me to do the most in Tolkien scholarship. Haha, because I can answer that question. And it was really Merry with the Rohirrim. When he's left alone after Pippin's gone away and Aragorn and Legolas and Gimli take the paths of the dead, and Merry's left with the Rohirrim. There are these scenes where you have Merry sitting there wondering what good he is. What value does he have as an individual? Because he's been in a group for so long, he hasn't had to define that for himself. And, you know, he keeps being called like a piece of luggage or a bag to be carried. He gets all of these metaphors as being just a burden to other people. And that was something, that kind of marginalization almost, was something that was really spoke to part of my experience as a kid. Not that I had a bad childhood at all, but as a kid, you're definitely aware of those times when it's like, okay, but the adults are talking.
Yeah.
And that's what that felt like to me in those scenes. And it was actually kind of that experience mixed with a couple other things that really inspired me to want to interview young readers for my PhD. And so I'm not going to say it's my favorite scene, but it's definitely one of the ones that inspired me the most to pursue what I have in Tolkien studies.
Oh, that's really interesting. And a great choice for a really good reason.
So we've talked about our favorite scenes. So let's talk about our favorite experience. What is your fondest experience of Tolkien's work?
My fondest experience, they're really experiences. And it's whenever I've been able to get together with a particular group of people who I tend to refer to as the Tolkienistas. And we don't get together very often, but it's that coming together when we can just talk about Tolkien to each other in a group where we have people who understand what we're talking about. I mean, where I live in rural North Wales, I actually don't know very many people who've even read Tolkien, let alone want to have a conversation about him and his work. So my favourite Tolkien experience is when I've been able to come together with others. So the Leeds Medieval Congress, which unfortunately has been cancelled again for next year. And I let out this howl of despair when I heard that, is where a bunch of people that I know really well come together and we give papers there. And it's a week out of my life that is just something I look forward to every single year. There's the wonderful big Tolkien Society conventions that have been put together over the years, 2005 in Birmingham, 2012 in Loughborough, for example, Birmingham 2019. Those kind of things where we all come together and we share in our love for this work. Those are good. Now, I'm aware that there are problems around that. I've become very aware of that recently, where, other people's voices aren't being heard, etc. And that's clearly something that needs to be addressed. And I want to make sure that those things are addressed. But I still love that idea of being able to come together with people to talk about something that is important to us all for whatever reason. So I hope that counts as my fondest experience. But what about you, Luke?
Mine is similarly kind of fan or scholarship focused. As much as I enjoy Tolkien's work, I realize that what Tolkien means to me is very different from what Tolkien means to anyone else. And in fact, what Tolkien means to me, Neil Gaiman might mean to someone else, or George R.R. Martin might mean to someone else. Because we all tend to latch on to books when they come to us with the right themes and the right ideas at the right time. And we take those books and we think about them and apply them to our lives and our scenarios and our situations, and we make meaning out of it between us and the book. And so my favorite thing is talking to other readers and finding those areas where their interpretation is different from my interpretation. And I don't enjoy that because I'm trying to prove my interpretation's better. But instead, by hearing their interpretation and how that's different from my interpretation, it expands my interpretation.
Yeah.
It allows for more possibilities and insights and cross-examinations to take place. And so that's, part of the reason why I've followed this trail of reception studies is I had the miraculous, to me, opportunity to sit down with young readers and hear each of their own personal interpretations, which was just a joy. All I had to do was write about it for a really long time. They gave me a PhD for it. So,
were it that easy? But yes,
I might be summarizing a little bit,
just a touch.
But that really is the most enjoyable part of Tolkien's work to me. The fact that it is so expansive and so imaginative, that it allows so much room for personal interpretation and personal meaning to be found in the gaps of the text. Tolkien was also often criticized by critics in the 20th century for not giving enough psychological information about the characters, staying kind of outwardly focused on the actions and deeds, those kinds of things. But first off, I think they're a little bit inaccurate in that. But secondly, the fact that Tolkien doesn't tell you exactly what all the characters are thinking at every single point in time allows us as readers to fill it in for ourselves.
Yeah.
And so I think that also allows for a greater diversity in interpretation. So those are things that I've really enjoyed coming back to again and again. And it's something that I honestly feel like keeps me engaged in Tolkien's work more than anything else, is the way that it can continue to evolve and change and show new facets, even if I've known this book for decades now.
Yeah, right. I mean, there has to be a reason why we are still talking about Tolkien's work all these years past his death, never mind past the last thing he published in his lifetime. So, I think that's a really good way of looking at it, that we have so much to share and there's so many different things to share. I mean, that's partly why you started up this podcast, isn't it?
Absolutely, because I hope that other people find that same kind of joy in hearing other people's experience and interpretations. And this podcast is just a celebration about that and the ways that Tolkien continues to have an impact on the world.
Yeah.
So hopefully we've given our listeners some new insights into us, their hosts, if you will. So I guess all that remains for us to do on this episode is to thank the listeners for being with us for so long. So is there anything you particularly want to say to our listeners?
Thank you very much for giving us your time and your energy, and also for, passing on the news about us as a podcast, and making sure that as many people as possible have heard about us. The purpose of this podcast is not for Luke and I to become incredibly famous podcasters. That would be nice, but no. It's about doing exactly what Luke was just saying there, about hearing what other people have to say about Tolkien, and reminding ourselves that there's an enormous breadth of knowledge and feeling and understanding about this man's work across the world. I think that's a wonderful thing. So, like you, I want to say thank you very much for indulging us and listening in and giving feedback, etc. So, what about you, Luke?
Yeah, I want to echo a lot of what you said there, that, this podcast is really about trying to bridge some of those groups in Tolkien fandom that don't tend to bridge very often. So like, we've interviewed members of the Tolkien Society. We've interviewed members of the Mythopoeic Society in America. We've interviewed people from Signum University. We've interviewed people involved with the OneRing.net. We've interviewed people involved in the Middle Earth News. We've really tried to cast a wide net in terms of bringing in as many different voices of Tolkien communities as possible.
Yeah.
And with your help, the help of our listeners, we've also been able to bring in voices of populations that have historically been marginalized in Tolkien conversations. So we want to thank all of our guests who have been on and been willing to share with us their experiences as a part of this effort to really bring together the Tolkien community to have this larger conversation and open up some of these. I don't want to say that they're cliques, because they're not intentional. They're not trying to keep people out, as far as I know, but these things that we don't often bridge. And so I hope that that's part of what this podcast is doing. But also at the same time, I know that that's kind of a grandiose goal for a little operation like this. So really, when it comes down to it, I just want to thank you so much for being willing to spend some of your time with us and to hear some of these remarkable experiences by people who have devoted a large portion of their lives to Tolkien, and they have found it to be a rewarding endeavor. So again, I just want to say thank you. So Sarah, anything else you think we need to add?
No, apart from this isn't it. This is just the end of the first season, and there will be a new season coming up. So look out for that at some point in the future.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And as always, we are available through social media, even if we are off season. So feel free to reach out to us there with any comments, questions, or concerns, or head over to TolkienExperience.com if you want to follow us there.